Well, welcome, Nicholas. I think you prefer Nicholas, right?
You can call me Nick.
Nick or Nicholas and Briandria to Interviewing Skills 101, so to speak, here, our mock interview or job interview skills. We're going to talk a little bit about everything here today. And so if you have questions, please feel free to stop and ask. If you need to use the chat feature, Briandria, just get my attention to let me know. Oops. As I'll be going over the basics and kind of giving you guys just some techniques, some skills, questions that may be asked that will be beneficial for anybody who's going through that process. And so I know Miss Knight's class does a mock interview. So if there's, this will be a good resource, as well as if they want to utilize me to actually practice a mock interview, I'm certainly available. You just have to set up a meeting with me, and I have no problems doing that whatsoever. All right. So why have an interview at all? What is the purpose of a job interview, right? So there's a self-assessment and agenda building, right? You're trying to figure out who you are and how you portray yourself as you come across to an interviewer, and the vice versa. They're trying to figure out who you are and see if you're a good fit for them. So a job interview ultimately comes down to having conversations about, things that you're going to be doing in reference to your job and your expectations, and then figuring out, will you be a good fit for our business, and vice versa? Am I a good fit for them, and do I want to be part of them too? And we're going to talk about challenges, trying to anticipate questions, uncomfortable legal questions, and legal questions you can ask the interviewer, image management after the interview, and final career service tips. So these are kind of the subjects, the things we're going to talk about today. Oh, I might be having some more students here, so give me one moment. I think they're coming in. They don't want to be at the workshop, Josh? Oh, well, okay. So moving on. So the interview it's a conversation, right? Of course, it's usually more nerve-wracking for the interviewee who's going through the process and being asked lots of questions. But it ultimately is a conversation. And so what is the role of the interviewer? Like I said, they're trying to find a good match for them. They're trying to be the gatekeeper who's talking to lots of people and say, yes, you'll make a good fit. I think you have what it takes. Moving on to the next round. Or they're hiring you on the spot, or provides the substantive assessment for a team that's going to review the people, and then serve as your ambassador. So if they really like you, and they think you do a good job, they could be there to help represent you as well. Your role during an interview is to sell yourself. You're trying to put your best foot forward and trying to impress whatever it is you're trying to get, whether it could be you're trying to get a scholarship, whether it's a job, whether it's, an internship. There's many different reasons to be interviewed. It's not always just for a job. You're trying to support your resume with examples of work that you've done, experience that you have, skills you may acquire or, you attain. And really, it's a sense for the interviewer to get to know you personally and how you could react to different situations, making sure that, that I keep saying the word fit, but in business culture, if the lifestyle of the group or the dynamic is like happy and outgoing and full of energy and whatever, they're going to be looking for people like that. And unfortunately, sometimes if you don't come across as dynamic and high energy and just putting everything into it, they're going to see that is not a good fit, and therefore you're not going to be recommended for the position. So it's about how your personality traits and how you come across. And ultimately, you want to impart your knowledge to the employer and practice areas that you have through your research and explanations. So when you're researching your employer, so when you're looking for a job, you should be researching who you're reaching out to, right? You want to study their websites, find out what their culture is, find out maybe what their philanthropic services are, their mottos, any kind of research you can do to get a better understanding, so that way when they ask you questions, you can be prepared to answer them about their company, right? So you're trying to weave your knowledge of the employer throughout the conversation. So as the employer is asking you, why are you applying for this company? And you could say, I really like the fast-paced atmosphere of everybody's very busy here. It's what I've observed when I came in. I'm really into your focus on education and being able for career development, and having explanation and examples to give to them to show that you're interested in the company. Because if you're not interested, then why are you applying, right? And then ultimately, you don't want to ask questions about that's readily available through your basic research. So if they've got all these things listed on their website, it's good to have the knowledge, but you don't necessarily want to portray that knowledge. You're trying to get a deeper. You could actually have conversations with other employees, before the interview. Talk about what is it like to work here. Do you like working here? What is and ask them what is their favorite part. And so you're trying to do more history, get more background before you actually go into your interview. But basically, the things you should know about each person you're applying for is the employer's history, like where their offices are located. So if you're applying for a job in New York, you might want to know that there's a position in New York that you're applying for, right? The size of the employer, the clients they'll be serving, any kind of press, whether it's good or bad. Obviously, you'll try to avoid talking about the bad press unless you can turn it into a positive light. Any kind of summer programs, internships, and maybe if you can find any information about the person who's that's doing the interview, that might be to your benefit, so that you can show that you've done your research. So we start talking about self-assessment and agenda building. So you're trying to conduct a self-assessment of what you're transitioning and going through. So basically, you're trying to come up with your agenda that's going to happen with this interview. And so what you'll want to do is, as the interview happens, is you're trying to gain control of your selling points. You want to make sure you have 4 things that you need to portray, 3 to 4 things, and be able to back them up with concrete examples. So as you looked at the job description and you noticed maybe you had to have really good communication skills, okay? Because you're going to be talking to their customers or their customer support or their clients. And so one of your selling points is that I've got lots of experience in communication. I'm a communications major. I had a part-time job. I was selling this product and I was best in my sales. You want to be able to come up with specific examples of how you excelled in those traits. If it was working under pressure, you might have said I was able to manage different projects at the same time, committing all my time and efforts and made sure I complete everything to job satisfaction. My employer or my boss was happy with my performance, and the work that I put out was what they were looking for. So you're trying to be able to come up with things, your selling points, and then the examples of where they are is on that right side. Try to focus on your transferable skills when you're selling yourself, okay? Your transferable skills are like I said, the things that you can relate to how the job description of what they're looking for, okay? So I think, do you remember what some of the job skills you were needed, Nicholas, for the student? Are you still having to apply for that student position? Is that one of the jobs? You're not doing that? So in Miss Amanda's night class, she was going to have you apply for a student position as like the administrative assistant working with the Office of the President. Is she not doing that this semester?
I don't think she is.
Okay. Well, I was just going to give it the example. If one of them was, event management, you could list on how you may have organized an event, or how you plan an event or a party, and how it all came together, and that you didn't leave anything. You didn't leave out any details, and it was a hit, and everybody had a really good time. So you have an example of how it worked. And then ultimately, if there's spots in the job description that you may not be strong at, or what they're saying here, the soft spots, things you may not have a lot of experience, or the skills you may not be strong in, you're going to have come up with answers to those harder questions, right? So if they're asking you about, tell me a little bit about your leadership experience, and you've never really held a leadership position from college or from working afterwards, you could talk about, maybe you didn't have a specific position, but maybe in your main group project for your major, you took lead and delegated tasks to your fellow students, and you made sure that everybody was doing things on time, and you took control of the situation. That shows leadership. That's an example. You may not have held a position, but at least you can give an example of how you were showing leadership. Does that make sense, Briandria?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Just making sure you're still with me. So some challenges in the interview process, and this happens a lot because most people who are being interviewed are nervous, especially if they've never practiced. And I cannot stress that enough. You've got to practice for interviews, especially for your course, your class. You're going to want to practice a couple of times to make sure that you're getting out all those butterflies. And the more you rehearse and the more you have your answers prepared, you are going to feel so confident, and you're just going to come across that you are, exhuming this confidence that you know what you're talking about and that you're not nervous, because you can tell when people are nervous. Okay, it's very easy to spot.
You're like my son being nervous, like my legs shaking when I'm talking in front of the class.
Sure, and it's very common. But to take away from that is just to be able to do it more. If you practice it, I guarantee you it'll start going away. And it's okay to have nervous habits. You just have to make sure that you try to pay attention to them when they're happening and make them reduce down to zero if you can. Okay? So one of the challenges here is listed. It's lack of specificity. That's a hard word to pronounce. And short answers. Okay? So if an employer was asking you, tell me a little bit about your last job, and then you responded, I really liked my last job. I think I did a pretty good job at it. Okay, well, that's not very helpful, right? You've ended the process. You didn't leave any room for them to follow up. He couldn't really expound on what you were talking about. So that short answer and lack of specificity, you're not being specific. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. I enjoyed the environment that I got to work. I got to come, work 4 hours a day, and I really enjoyed the people I got to interact with, and the customers were great, and I enjoyed the product that I used. You've got to come up with examples and allow the employer an opportunity to say, well, what did you like about the product? And then they could go on and talk about that. So you're trying to leave an open discussion, whereas if you end it quickly, they don't know where to go, so they may just go to the next question, and then you're going to get marked that you didn't really answer that question. Okay.
I wasn't supposed to answer that question, was I?
What's that? No. This is all. That was rhetorical.
Example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Another challenge: low energy and intensity. So, if an employer asked you, why do you think you'd make a good fit for this position? And you're like, well, I'm very energetic and I enjoy working with people. And I have a lot of the customer service skills that are required of this position. I've been working at McDonald's at the customer service team manager, and I've had excellent peer reviews as well as my boss reviews. And I really enjoy getting to know people and making them happy and satisfied. Did I sound enthusiastic about what I was talking about?
No.
Not at all, right? I was very monotone. I was very slow. I'm not saying you have to talk fast. I'm just saying the way I portrayed my intensity and energy, it was, you could tell I wasn't that enthusiastic, right? And it's even harder if you were to do that over a Zoom meeting, or a Zoom or over the phone or whatever. They're gonna note that, right? You want to be like, yes, I really enjoyed my last position. It was a lot of fun. I got to meet great people and work with a great staff and manage them, and I really enjoyed the day-to-day activities and so forth and so on. Okay, You've got to show energy. You've got to show that you're interested. If you're not interested in the job, once again, do not apply. Now, it's a little different when in class because you're getting a grade, but treat it as if you were actually applying for that job, as if you got the job, you got an A, okay? Undervaluing experiences or achievements. So know what you've done and be proud of it and be able to expand upon it when they ask you, because otherwise you might not come up with better examples and it may not really show who you really are and what you're capable of. So really play up those experiences and achievements that have been a part of your life. Don't act arrogant or cocky. That shouldn't have to be on there, but it's just a reminder. If you think you've already got the job, maybe you're the only person who applied and you think you've got the job. Do not act arrogant or cocky because you've got it. Yeah, because, right, but here's the thing. In the end, they're like, I know he was our only candidate, but I think we might need to wait and hire later. And then you don't get a call back and you wonder why. Well,
Yeah.
it's probably because you had your cocky behavior. Obviously, never use negative language or have a bad attitude, right? Because you're selling the best side of you, right? The best side of you.
Yeah, because even though you are your judge, you're doing the right thing, you use that bad language.
Oh, for sure. And especially if it's not part of the culture, right? So if I were to use foul language during my interview at a private 2-year Methodist affiliated institution like Andrew College, do you think they would have responded well for me cussing during my interview? Absolutely not. There's no need for it. It's not professional. Okay.
They in Italy they actually use cocky bad language gestures, like when they like scope their head like this.
Right.
They do like this.
Right.
And they also do this.
Right, but you would never do that during an interview because they know what you were talking about, and
I
you
would
would
never be doing
right.
that.
And once again, no obvious interest in the poor or private sector general. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the mock interview, practice, practice, practice. That is how you can succeed in your actual interview. So in the mock interview, you've got to practice the same things we're talking about here, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can do a mock interview with a friend, a neighbor, a faculty staff member, a colleague, anybody, me, I will certainly help you do a mock interview. I have no problems doing that whatsoever. I love it. It's fun. I get to critique all the things I would love to improve about you. Okay. You may not like it, but it's only to help you grow. It's only help you to realize the mistakes you're making while you're going through the process. Because lots of times you have no idea. Like Brianda right now, not that it's anything wrong with it, she's curling her hair. Okay. So if we were having an interview right now, I would find that very distracting as an interviewer. You can still curl your hair. I'm giving an example, but it's very distracting to the interviewer, and they may make a note of that and take notes saying, it was a nervous habit, it was distracting, and that could lose you points, right, to be the top prospect, right? You have to be aware of all those small idiosyncrasies or those things that you do that you don't realize you do. And then it's nice to have someone point them out and be like, you said the word a lot. You said the word like a lot. You said the word and See, you may not have ever noticed you said it once, okay? But I noticed you said it 22 times. Well, now when you go into your interview, you need to make sure you stop and pause in between questions and have your thoughts together so you don't say and, right? It's okay to have a comfortable silence, all right? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and also, is that different or is it the same?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
Like you say, and what else? No, that's not right. But, so
you can't. I mean, you could do it as long as you didn't make a habit of it, right? So if you were excited about another point you were bringing up, you could do that to emphasize another idea you had. But if you constantly interrupted the interviewer to say, to make your point, the interviewer is going to get frustrated. They might make a note of it. Trust me, you don't ever want to try to interrupt the interviewer because it's considered rude, okay? Anticipate questions employers might ask and have answers rehearsed. Cannot stress this enough. I can tell you, if you Google anticipating or questions that interviewers are going to ask, you're going to get hundreds of questions, okay? But there are certain ones they're always going to ask. So you guys, Briandria or Nick, do you have an example of one that they may ask you?
Yeah.
Brandra's going to use the chat. Oh, whoops, go back. Hold on.
Steve, can you hear
Where's
me?
my chat?
Uh,
Chat. Where's Alt H? Pulling it down. What? You better not have stopped working. All right. Do you have here, Briandria? Ah. What's one question you think an employer might ask you during an interview? All right. And as you respond, can you type in there, Briandria? Are you able to type into the chat? Yes?
yes.
Wonderful. You answer that question. I'm going to ask Nicholas, see what he's got for me, okay? What do you? What's one question do you think an employer is going to ask you?
How long you work here? You have to ask like a specific question that it doesn't involve.
So you don't currently work for them. They're going to ask you a question. So I've actually already given you a few, if you can remember.
Sorry, so I get lost in.
That's okay. So if you put yourself in the employer's position and you were trying to hire a new employee, okay? What's something you'd want to know about that employee? What's a question you'd ask?
Have you had any previous jobs before?
There you go. What's your previous work experience, right?
Okay.
Okay, perfect example. And then you'd be able to answer and then have an answer prepared in your head. How would you respond to that? Well, I worked at Andrew College. I was a student assistant for financial aid. I helped do this, that, and the other. Okay, good question. Briandra doesn't have one yet. That's okay. She's working on it. All right, a very popular one. Why do you want to work here? What are some skills that you have that you think would make you qualified for this position?
What I know.
I'm just giving you examples right now.
I'm just trying to pass this along.
Sure.
Like you're the employer.
Sure.
I'm the employee.
Right.
What's the word I'm looking for? Participant. How's that?
Sure.
Because from what this is, like for example, if we were working in a museum based on World War II or animals.
Sure.
I would tell them that because I love animals, I've known a lot about them. Or in World War II, I've learned a lot through history.
Right.
And documents.
How can you contribute to our company? Perfect, right? So what things are you going to do? Are you going to be how are you going to be an asset, right? Are you going to be a hard worker? You're going to fit well within the company. You're going to, whether participate in their, nighttime activities. However you want to answer it. That's a culture question. It's not a bad question to ask at all. Like I said, there are hundreds here. Look, I will Google it real quickly. Just so you guys get to know, Google. Questions asked during an interview. I try to avoid the ones. Tell me about yourself. How did you hear about this position? Why do you want to work here? Why do you want this job? Why should we hire you? What are your greatest strengths? What are your biggest weaknesses? Look, there's just in this one article, there's 47 questions. When can you start? Can you relocate? What makes you unique? What's your dream job? See, I'm not saying you have to prepare for every one, but you should prepare for probably the first 10 on this one alone. So tell me about yourself. How did you hear about this position? Why do you want to work at this company? Why do you want this job? Why should we hire you? What are your greatest strengths, your weaknesses? What is your greatest professional achievement? Tell me about challenges or conflict you faced at work and how did you deal with it? And tell me about your time you've demonstrated leadership skills. See, I talked about leadership. I talked about why should you be hired. These are all questions yet they're going to ask. If you know they're going to ask them, prepare for an answer. Because otherwise you're like, right? So if they were to ask you a question, it's okay to take a couple of seconds to get your thoughts together. That is perfectly acceptable to have a pause. I know in our society we like to talk a lot. I can talk fast and I can talk a lot. But if I didn't know the answer, if they said, why do I want this job? And I paused, the pause is because I'm thinking exactly how I want to frame the answer. Okay, it's not because I don't know the answer. And you may not know the answer, but you try to come up with the best answer possible. Even if you're not 100% sure, come up with something that's close, and always try to answer the question. That's a huge pet peeve of somebody who's doing an interview. Okay. Anticipated interview questions, right? Strengths and weaknesses, probing, situation-based, comparative. It's all right here, and I put in some questions through ThriveYard as well. So I can send you guys the link, and you can prepare as well. All right, so common interviewer concerns, grades or attitude towards grades, right? Affirmative, address employer concerns so you don't leave the interview with unanswered questions. Lack of professional experience falls in that category, and lack of obvious geographic ties. Extensive public interest background, career transitions, and dual degrees. Don't make excuses except, so what is listed here are if an interview saw that you didn't have a high GPA because you had to send in your transcripts, or you didn't have a lot of professional experience, or you transferred a lot from schools and you had resume gaps. These are all things that are very common to most people. They're saying here, take a negative and how are you going to swap it around? So if you have resume gaps due to illness or difficult life circumstances, you don't dwell on the topic and you try to change the story and end it on a positive note, right? So, and you can talk about it, but just make sure that you ended it in a positive light. Say, well, while I may have been sick for several months, I was able to, find professional development during that time. And then I started immediately applying as soon as I got better, right? Ending it on a positive note, trying to find that switch. You don't want to leave a negative taste in there at the end of whatever you're defending to the interviewer, because then they're going to question, oh, that's a red flag, right? So you want to be able to defend yourself. This is your time to defend. Questions that are also difficult to ask. A lot of times employers may ask you questions based off race, national origin, gender, your sexual orientation, the color of your skin, your marital status, your disability, your age, and your religion. These are all illegal HR questions they are not supposed to ask and can be sued if they do ask. Yeah. However, if you still want the job, you still have to answer the question. So what do? Okay? Somebody asks you, are you married?
No, sir.
See, and you may not be married now, but if you were married and you didn't mind telling them, sure, you could tell them, right? If you didn't think it would affect the outcome. But if you were offended by it and didn't want to say, you could tell them, well, I'm not really sure what that has to do with me being hired. However, I do feel my qualifications and experience from X, Y, and Z make me a suitable candidate that doesn't really have to consider why I'm married or not, right? So I'm flipping it.
Wait, would this not be a good question to say? I said, before I answer that, not being rude, I think, sir or ma'am, but isn't that kind of a little rude to say that? Wouldn't that be a bad thing to say?
So you could, but they may also take that as considered to be rude. And so they may make that note on there. Gotcha. So unfortunately, illegal questions, while they're illegal, they still expect an answer, and you have to play it delicately. Like you have to understand that you have to, how you answer it either is going to be helpful for you or it's going to hurt you, right? There may be a bigger lady who's applying for a job, and maybe he's like, are you expecting any children in the near future, right? Illegal question. They're trying to figure out if they've got somebody who's about to be on maternity leave and will do their job, right? Illegal question, okay? So once again, you could try to flip the switch and talk about, I'm not sure why my being pregnant has to do with this. However, I do want to point out that, I've had gleaming peer reviews and, professional development, and just switch. You got to flip it to make it positive, okay? So how do you handle these, right? How old are you? Are you asking how many years of experience I have? That's how you could respond. Do you plan to have children? I'm focused on my career, and you can be sure of my commitment to the job. How's your health? I'm fully able to perform all the job duties as described in the job posting. What is your religion? My religious practices have no impact on how I perform my job. And how do you feel about working for a woman? I always have successful work as part. I have worked successfully as part of the culture, right? Um, we've already talked about these somewhat, right? Weave your questions throughout, but leave some. Oh, so I'm sorry. Going back a little bit. So towards the end, the interview is going to ask you, "Do you have any questions for us?" Okay, because this is your time to ask. You should always ask a question, no matter what. Even if you think you don't have any question to ask, always ask a question, and make sure that has nothing to do with salary, benefits, perks, summers, things that you can find, things you should know or should find out as soon as you're hired, okay? Because that's already telling them you're more concerned with everything else than the actual job, okay? Use your questions to exude genuine interest in the firm. So you could ask about, tell me about, if you didn't know, tell me about the culture at here, you know. Do most of your employees like it here? What are your professional development opportunities? Okay. Spin it around, make yourself sound important and that you're really interested in the company. Ask research-based questions that you really want answered. And like I've already talked about those two. And then ask you focused questions, right? So turn around and ask the interviewee, how do you like it here? You know, what's your favorite part about your job and working here? How long have you worked here, right? Those are questions the interviewer likes to talk. Let them talk. I promise you, it'll only benefit you in the long run. Because if they do most of the talking and you provide good, you've provided good answers throughout your interview, they're more likely like, yeah, they were really interested in me too. That's great. I really liked how they did that. All right, so the right questions to ask in a job interview. Talk about the culture. Talk about, like I said, professional development. Talk about the job, the evaluation process, what's the next steps for this interview process? When will we expect to know something if we made it to the next stage? Training opportunities, the organization, the hiring manager. Never talk about the salary, okay? All right, so then looking at now because we're moving things more remotely and online, we're moving to Zooms, we're moving to Skypes, we're moving to FaceTimes, whatever it's going to be. So it's a whole different ball game. It's a different interviewing process when you're having to do it over the video chat versus face-to-face, right? So things to consider, right? Do a test run with your computer, download the software, and check for updates in software. There's nothing worse than you being late to the meeting because you didn't do everything on your end first, okay? Picking the perfect spot. I can't stress this enough. Pick somewhere that's got a neutral background, that has good Wi-Fi signal if you needed to connect, and a location where you're doing it remotely. Choose a low back, small chair that doesn't creak, okay? So if you look like you're hunched over, it's gonna look awkward to them. So you need to make it look as natural as possible, and there's less noise and movements that are fidgety, so it will distract the interviewer, okay? And then figure out, is the lighting good? Do I look good? Can they see me, right? Can they see my facial expressions? Can they see that I'm looking into the camera and talking into the camera like I was face to face? Eliminate all distractions. If you had a job interview and you were going to be babysitting a grandchild or a brother or sister, that is not a good scenario. That is a huge distraction. If you've got animals that are constantly jumping up and down on you, you've got to remove them. Avoid all distractions. Okay, so make sure the room's quiet with all those other settings. Make sure you're sitting up and you dressing professionally. Professional dress for those. A guide is in the 2019-2020, the career guide. If you looked on page 23 and 24, there's samples of what's considered professional dress. If you didn't dress your bottom half on an online interview, it's probably okay, but you should still be wearing a dress shirt for men and a tie, possibly a coat, and for ladies they should be wearing blazers. Still wearing neutral and suitable makeups, a suit, and their hair should look good as well as for men as well. So before your interview, try to do things to relax your nerves, right? So if you can allot yourself a half an hour to just de-stress and just review the questions and the answers, and the more confident you feel about your answers, the better you're going to feel and the less nervous you're going to feel. You've got to do things to calm yourself down, maybe listening to some music or do whatever you got to do. Here, prioritize the camera, not the screen. You want to make sure the camera's focused on you and not the background. Okay, that's just a setting on there. Make sure you're looking at the interviewer's eyes as best you can. It doesn't have to be all the time, but you should be able to look at them and make sure that they can see you and that you're not like constantly looking down like this, because they can tell you're not looking. Make sure you double check the time of the meeting. You know, they may have scheduled a meeting on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast. That's a big difference. I saw this one. Wear earbuds so that you can hear them better and they can hear you if it's got the speaker in there, right? Because sometimes the speakers on these HD devices, or, you know, the webcams, isn't very good. You need to make sure they can hear you. You can make a cheat sheet. If you needed like small references, like if you had, like a lot of times what I do is I keep my resume there. So that way, if they're referencing things that I've done, I've got it in front of me and I can look back to giving examples of my skills or my, you know, my experience just as a reminder. You could create a cheat sheet for answers just with bullet points of what you want to make sure that they know. There's nothing wrong. They can't see it. Just make sure it doesn't become distracting. Don't use your computer. Does that one make sense if I said don't use your computer?
I would use on that.
Okay, so what that means is if you can multitask and do things on your computer at the same time you're having an interview, don't do it. So like checking tasks or things are popping up and you want to respond, you want to avoid all that. You don't want to hear typing unless they're asking you to type things in there. You don't want to have, especially like for me, I have 2 screens at my office one. If I had 2 screens, I don't want to be answering emails while I'm doing an interview. Not going to work. It's definitely unprofessional. Don't lose your personality during an online interview. A lot of times people think it's because it's remote, they can't portray who they really are. It's quite the opposite. You can still do exactly the same thing. You just got to remember you're having an interview. You're basically face to face. It's just online. And lastly, I always say this, send a follow-up email after the interview, thanking them for the time, that you're excited about the position, and that you look forward to hearing from them soon, okay? It's just a nice gesture because they've taken time, 30 minutes to an hour out of their day to interview you. You should be able to thank them for it, and email is definitely the notable way. We talked briefly about image management. So that said pages 23 and 24. Become familiar with it. Things do change. So as style changes and you know, just rules and regulations change, this may not become the norm. It may change. So just keep up with the norms for dressing for an interview. I put some examples here. All right, keep your hair clean. You want to be tucked in. Nice suit. Power tie for men. For ladies, like I said, they could wear a 2-piece suit or a blazer. Make sure it's like knee-high length. Hosiery if necessary. Darker shoes and minimal conservative jewelry. You don't want to have lots of showy pieces. Even if that's who you are, you're trying to impress them. They may find it offensive. So we want to make sure that you're dressing to the standards. Now, obviously, for your interview if you do the mock interview with Miss Knight, I would consider wearing a nice dress shirt. If you want a tie, wear a tie, and you know, dressing the best you can for what you have here. Okay. Once again, after the interview, try not to take notes about the interview. You're going to do that at the very end when they've already left. Once again, thank you notes, sending them via email for their time. Send it within 24 hours. Address it correctly to the right person. And then if you forgot to, like, you could insert anything you forgot to say, oh, I forgot to tell you about this wonderful job experience that we didn't have time during the interview. And you could do a brief note about it in the interview, and that's acceptable. And then remind the interviewer, you're qualified. I am qualified for this position. I'm ready to get to work, and I'd love working for you in this company, right? It's a great way to end it. And then where to get help from there. If you're still not sure, come see me. We can, like I said, practice for the mock interview. I can ask you questions. We can work on how you would answer them, what your answers would be. We can take questions that may seem difficult and try to make them easier for you guys. Okay?